Belonging Again, Part 1, An Explanation, a book in which you will find works such as The Legitimization Crisis of Our Lives, The Trance of Believability, Native Tongues and Native Worldviews, the essay Belonging Again, after which the book is named, and many more pieces. This is Part 1. The second part, which is called An Address, is a different book that comes out afterwards. A quotation from Beirut to Jerusalem by Thomas L. Friedman that opens the book. "I must tell you," he confided, "I just came back from 2 years in Germany. It was paradise. It was Germany, but it was paradise. No news, no one waiting for the Messiah. It was so relaxing. Here you live in a very dynamic state. You are always involved in everything, always listening to the news. You can't escape the utopian aspiration to the left or the messianic expectations of the right. You can never relax. People are always arguing about your identity. People are always asking you to decide. Are you a Jew? Well, what kind of Jew? Are you a Zionist? Well, what kind of Zionist? You turn on the television and people are arguing about the borders, about the boundaries between religion and state. Nothing is ever settled here. You just can't relax." "But Dad," his daughter said, "that's the fun of the place." Another quotation from Vonnegut, Kurt Vonnegut, the author, by Richard Giannoni. The quotation: "Jonah cannot comprehend this ambiguity. He prefers to see Nineveh wiped out for the sake of his need for certitude. God's pity for Nineveh effectively undermines any hope Jonah might have of finding a settled, predetermined order behind God's plan." And lastly, a quotation from Joseph Anton by Salman Rushdie. "Was it possible to become good at being not rootless, but multiple-rooted, not to suffer from a loss of roots, but to benefit from an excess of them?" Those are some of the opening quotations of Belonging Again. And you already find on this channel a number of entries from the essay Belonging Again. But today we are going to begin putting the book together with reading from the essays and leading up to that longer essay and then go into the conclusion and so on and so on. Today I'm going to be reading the introduction, which is called A Theory of Psychohistorical Process and Note on the Language of Givens and Releases. And this is the introduction to Belonging Again, Part 1. This book is heavily indebted to Philip Rieff, the genius behind the triumph of the Therapeutic. I first read Rieff in December 2016, thanks to my dear friend Vincent Zimmern sending me a copy, and I immediately found myself inspired to write Belonging Again between then and March of 2017, which I have added to and edited ever since. I also read Peter Berger and James Hunter, both who also heavily inspired this text. Without these brilliant sociologists and others like Conyers and Arendt, this book would not exist. Here, though what I mean exactly will require the book to clarify, I wanted to draw attention to why I use the language of givens and releases, while Rieff himself discusses constraints and releases, and/or controls and releases. I personally feel givens captures the spirit and meaning of Rieff's schema, but it has also been brought to my attention that I need to elaborate on why I use givens in the context of Rieff's work. In all transparency, since 2016, I often forgot that givens was not the exact language Rieff himself used, and though I don't think this changed the meaning of Rieff's work, I would still like to provide an explanation for why I like the language of givens so much. Basically, it's because I think givens is how Rieff's work can be used to describe a psychohistoric process that we need to understand today if we have any hope of overcoming the meaning crisis and additional fallout. Rieff tells us that doctrines of release in a culture cannot of themselves develop into new modalities of purpose unless they are subtly transformed and institutionally elaborated, which begs the question of how this might occur, historically unfold. Rieff warned that whenever a releasing symbolic increases its jurisdiction to the point where it no longer serves to support the incumbent moral demands, but rather contradicts them, that culture is in jeopardy. And this is what Rieff admonished was occurring in the West. He put it very well when he wrote, "When the cross becomes a symbol of power or beauty, suppressing the historical reminder of a particularly brutal instrument of humiliation and death, then its own moral authority under the Christian rubric of cross-bearing is threatened." The paradoxical tension of our problem is here pronounced. Calvary becomes beautiful because it saves us, and that is when the power of Calvary to hold society together can weaken and fail. And yet if Calvary isn't good and beautiful to us, why should we care to follow its call and demands? Well, in the past, it was generally because Calvary was given and objectively true, not because we liked it or even consciously considered it. But what about today when Christianity isn't given, to make an example of a single religion? Well, that presents a problem, because that means Christianity must be chosen, which means Christianity must be individually appealing, say, by being beautiful and or good, and that means the power of Christianity to bind and compel us must be greatly weakened. Even if we choose Christianity, the Christianity chosen today is not the same sociologically as the Christianity which was given yesterday, and it is this critical shift that should be given careful and focused attention. To know where we need to go, we must first know where we are, but it's also important to know how we arrived at our present moment. And it is on this point that I will highlight why I prefer givens over constraints. I feel givens better helps the work of Philip Rieff be incorporated into a theory of psychohistorical process, which Rieff suggested at the end of the Triumph of the Therapeutic needed to be written. Rieff tells us that his book is a tentative prospect of the revolution, drawing first some implications from various attacks on the failing cultural superego. He also claims that he is not interested in defending the traditional culture that is in today increasingly lost, writing that the classical internalizations of social authority as an unconscious conscious may be indefensible anyway. In this way, Rieff tells us that we are in trouble without social constraints, but he also tells us that we cannot be quick to reestablish them. In other words, the loss of givens is a problem, but the solution isn't necessarily to bring them back, at least not how traditionally understood. What then should we do? The hope of Belonging Again is to help address this question, doing of which I believe requires a theory of the psychohistorical process. That is what I hope you find in this text, which will ultimately try to connect Rieff with the likes of Hume and Hegel. I will leave it up to readers to decide if I succeed in that undertaking. And with that, we close the introduction of Belonging Again, Part 1, afterwards, which will begin the main text with the essay, The Legitimization Crisis of Our Lives. For more by O.G. Rose, please visit ogrose.com, Twitter, Anchor, Instagram, YouTube, so on and so forth. And thank you so much for your time.